Hello and welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. You can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn Radio, or you can add our RSS feed to your podcatcher of choice. You can follow us on Twitter or Google+, and please give us feedback. Leave us a review on iTunes to help other people find the show, send us a tweet or an email, leave us a message on Google+, or in our show notes, or you can also join our new community. Visit discourse.pythonpodcast.com for your opportunity to find out about upcoming guests, suggest questions, and propose show ideas. I would like to thank everyone who has donated to the show. Your contributions help us make the show sustainable. For details on how to support the show, you can visit our site at pythonpodcast.com. Linode is sponsoring us this week. You can check them out at linode.com/podcastinit and get a $20 credit to try out their fast and reliable Linux virtual servers for your next project. I would also like to thank Hired, a job marketplace for developers and designers, for sponsoring this episode of Podcast.init. Use the link hired.com/podcastinit to double your signing bonus. Your hosts, as usual, are Tobias Macy and Chris Patty. Today we are interviewing Ozsvald and Emlyn Clay about their work with PyData London, a group within the PyData organization. PyData London represents the largest Python group in London at about 2,850 members. They hold regular monthly meetups for 200 members at AHL near Bank, and a yearly conference for around 300 members. Last year, they and their sponsors raised over £26,000 to sponsor the development of core numerical libraries in Python. So, Ian and Emlyn, could you please introduce yourselves? Ian, why don't you go first?
Well, I'll be happy to introduce myself, but I'm just going to correct you there. So, PyData London is not just London's largest Python user group, but it's the UK's largest Python user group. And I think, Emlyn, tell me, I think we're Europe's largest Python user group as well.
I guess
I'm not quite sure.
I gave Tobias this little intro so that he could fill us in, and I didn't want to blow our horn too much. It's been a crazy 2 years building this meetup, building this group. We're Europe's biggest.
We're certainly the UK's, and I think Europe's. Yeah. I'm going to claim Europe's until somebody tells me I'm wrong. We're not the US's. The New York Python user group is definitely a lot larger than ours. But on the world stage, we're not doing bad. So, who am I? So my name is Ian Ozsvald. I've been working in data science for 15 years. I'm an O'Reilly author with High Performance Python, and with Emlyn, we co-chaired the first conference 3 years ago, PyData London, and then we built the meetup out of that. And I'm a long-time Pythonist and C++ programmer before that, and international speaker.
Emlyn, how about you?
Right, so my name is Emlyn Clay. I'm a bit of a chameleon in that my background is in pharmacology, which is sort of a lot of wet science, doing drug discovery. I got into doing software, sort of tinkering about 10 years ago. Been doing it professionally for about 6 years. I co-chair PyData London with Ian here, and I use Python in anger. I have many production systems now up there, and as well as Python, I write in a number of other languages as well, but it's certainly one that's close to my heart.
So how were you each introduced to Python?
Hey, Chris. So I started using Python in my first real job back around 1999. It was somewhere around 2001 or so. At the time, I was senior programmer for a C++ group in an artificial intelligence research company, and I was really proud of the speed of our C++ code, doing things like logistics optimization work. And one day I was given some Python code for a SAX parser written in Python for some HTML, and asked to improve this parser for one of the NLPs, the natural language processing teams in our French office. And I remember looking at it disdainfully and thinking, why would I need to write in this ridiculous scripting language when I've got the power of C++ behind me and a team of 5 working with me? And then learning Python in the space of a day, learning how to improve this SAX parser, I suddenly realized I was more productive in a day's learning than I was after 5 years as a senior programmer with C++ for text processing. And that was a bit of a wake-up call. And then since then, I've never looked back. I use Python for almost all of my work, almost exclusively in the last 5 years for data science, falling back every now and again to use C++ when necessary, hardly touching any other languages, and just really, it's like an over 10-year love affair with the Python language.
And Emlyn?
Right, so I like to consider the time I got introduced to Python was the day that Excel broke. So at the time, I was doing some signal processing on ECG data. And like most life scientists, we don't really have any formal training in doing any programming. So I was trying to find anything to sort of get it working well. And I've been toying around with MATLAB for a little while, but didn't have access to the computer down in the computer labs at King's College in London. And Python was available, so I could put it on my computer and play with it there. And that kind of, spawned the interest there. So I started using it to do biomedical analysis, statistical analysis on various data sets I had access to. So I started off with scripting, just in that sort of way. And then from there, the web got more and more impressive. So it then span out into those sorts of things. But Python's always been particularly good as sort of a scientist toolbox because all of the numerical libraries are particularly strong. And it feels a lot like MATLAB. So, you can almost forget that you are using it for that purpose. That's how I got introduced.
And what is the PyData organization, and how does PyData London fit into it, and what is your relationship with it?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and I'm not entirely sure what is the PyData organization. I know that it started several years ago. It's a relatively young organization. It started back in 2012 in the USA, and out of that it spawned a number of conferences. There have been 14 to date, I believe. The first one that was run in Europe was run by Emlyn and myself and several of our colleagues 3 years ago. And so we hosted the first in Europe. Last year there were a couple in Europe, and this year there'll be 5 in Europe and 5 in America. So it's growing rapidly. Emlyn, how would you define the organization of PyData?
Yeah, so, you and I were there, I think, at the second ever one. And that was attached to PyCon US in 2013, which is where Ian and I met. I think they had one before that at the Google campus. Mm-hmm. And this was, as far as I'm aware, it was started up as a counterpoint to PyCon, which was more sort of general, all sorts of topics that touch on Python. And PyData was focused on people who were using it for doing data analysis, signal processing, statistics, things of that nature, things that were much more sort of a data-driven problem. And all of it, I guess, built around NumPy, which in some ways, NumPy is kind of its own entire ecosystem on top of, inside of Python. I think that's kind of what it was. It was trying to make it so that it was very much about numerical computation parts than Python.
And it's slightly, it sits alongside the older SciPy conference and the European Euro SciPy series, which are, I would argue, a little bit more academically focused, and PyData sits a little bit more on the industrial side. Both have industrial and academic speakers along, but I think both have a slightly different focus. And I think it's quite nice to be able to mix the two sides, but accepting that perhaps it's more interesting for a series to have a lot of academic contribution, and others for industrialists to share their achievements and their problems and the success stories with actually getting things shipped, because that alone is really quite a hard technical challenge in a changing data world.
And taking a brief diversion, you guys mentioned that the meetup has grown to a pretty significant number of members, and I'm just wondering if you can give some insight into how you managed to build and expand that community and how you managed to sort of keep it together and keep people interested.
So we have, I'm just looking at the screen now, 2,872 members. I'm really proud of that number. I'm proud every time it goes up, and I get very excited. I scraped the growth numbers, and we generated a graph for the meetup. And then we have a graph that shows, I don't know how to describe this, 2 lines. One goes up at a certain rate until Christmas, a year and a bit back. And then it grows linearly, but at a faster rate. We don't know what changed. It grew faster. Now, exactly how we've helped make it grow, I'm not quite sure. Emlyn, what are your thoughts on why the audience is growing so well?
We know exactly how we've made this grow. So I think one of the big things that attracts people to PyData London is that it's unashamedly sort of intermediate, advanced level stuff. So it's really interesting talks, whether, the speakers are completely at liberty just to sort of go, here's the stuff I'm doing, and here's all this interesting, these ways fits together, which I think creates a fantastic driving force, which has helped bring all these excellent speakers in. We've always made it sort of light and fun. We've had excellent sponsors. They've always been great at providing, pizza and beer. It's very social. And I think that's kind of what sort of pushed it along. I think around us, though, there's been the general macro environment is that Python has just become more and more important for data scientists, and data science as a job has become furiously more in demand, especially in London, over the past 18 months or so.
There is certainly something interesting around the timing. Around 6 years ago, at a Hacker News event in London, I stood up on stage at the end and said to about the 500 people in the audience, I said, "Hey, I want to organise some kind of data-related meetup. Who's with me?" And about 30 hands gingerly went up, and I looked around and thought, "Wow, it's not a huge number of people, given 500 people who are coming to this Hacker News event." And then a couple of years later, some data science groups started in London, and ours started about a year later. And I think there are 12 related data science events now, from machine learning and deep learning through to visualization and Kaggle competitions. So there's a whole range of events now that have all sprung up and grown in the last 3 years. There's definitely a local timing event in London. I don't really know. I don't quite know how that works. I know with the meetup, we're very keen to have a meetup every month, sponsored by a good host. And so we've had Pivotal at the beginning, so they got us started, and then List, the fashion recommender, sponsored us for another 6 months, and then we moved to AHL, a hedge fund, who've been sponsoring us for over a year now. And as Emlyn says, we only have good speakers. We have no product sales pitches. It's all about good technical data stories, the highs and the lows. We have a good diverse speaker set and audience, and we try to encourage interesting stories and a nice environment facilitated by beer and pizza, and it seems to work terribly well.
Yeah, the rise in data science as a particular discipline I've definitely seen that happening in a lot of different places, and I can definitely see how that would contribute to the growth of a data-oriented meetup group. And also, as you were mentioning, how there are a number of somewhat related, more niche meetups, but I think that having a sort of unifying group where people can get a cross-discipline view of what other people are working on is definitely very interesting. I know that whenever I go to any meetups, it's very interesting seeing what people in other domains and other particular subcategories of my work are up to. So you mentioned that you are co-chairs of the PyData London conference, and I'm wondering, in what ways does a PyData conference differ from a PyCon?
That's quite good. So it generally, a lot of it focuses more on, here is the particular data problem I tried to solve, and here is the implementation I used. And I know that there are a lot of PyCon talks that are about that as well. But I guess PyCon focuses on so many broad things that generally it's sort of a bigger mixed bag, whereas there's generally a sort of a common narrative. Do you reckon, Ian, there's a common sort of pattern that the speakers, they come along and it's, here's my problem, here's how we've implemented it, and here's what we're going on to in future, which, is kind of a common framework to all the talks that are done at PyData.
Right, but the focus is definitely at the PyData simply around the data rather than, for example, web development or back-end system support. I certainly remember when I attended a EuroPython in 2010, I remember going to all the different tracks and listening to a lot of the talks there, and then getting to the end of the conference and being a little bit grumpy. And I spoke to a colleague and said, hey, it's great that we've got quite so many talks on Django and general web development, but surely people are doing stuff with the data in their databases, not just putting it on the screen in pretty boxes. And then my friend said, well, there's a community conference here, that the way you fix this is that you do something technical next year on data. And I thought, Oh, crikey, yeah, actually, it's probably time that I did something and gave back rather than just consuming these tools that are provided for me. So the next year I proposed a high-performance Python tutorial. I didn't know how to pitch it, and so I crammed in as much as I could, and it turns out that I thought I had 3 hours. I had actually 2.5 hours with breaks, and so I crammed about 6 hours of material into 3 hours. I didn't let my students out of their room, and I did my bit to make sure that everyone learned lots of high-performance computing as a precursor to dealing with data. And then after that, I sat back and thought, ooh, I wonder if there are other Python conferences that deal with data rather than just everything, like PyCons and the EuroPythons. And that's when I discovered EuroSciPy, and so EuroSciPy is a bit more academically focused, and that's been running for, I think, 8 years now, moving throughout Europe. And then the PyData series sprung up in the last 3 or 4 years, and definitely all of the PyDatas, all the videos are online. You can find them at pydata.org. All the videos are there, and they all focus on data processing. I'd say that's the core difference to PyCons.
And have you noticed a difference in terms of the sort of the feel of the audience, or the the demographics, or just the general populace of people who attend a PyData conference versus a PyCon?
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, right. So,
Emlyn, what do you think?
Right. So I guess certainly we don't feel like the audience has changed inside the group. That's been quite nice. So along the lines of we're one of the things that is the continued strength of PyData is that the mix of people there is fantastic. Compared to a PyCon, I guess what do you reckon? Like the sort of almost the job spec of the person. There's a lot more. Of course, there's a lot more data science people. Invariably, we have a lot of people who are sort of former scientists who have come into programming. That, I think, is more common than having sort of career programmers, I think, as our sort of mix.
Yeah, I'd agree. And we certainly have maybe a third of our audience are data engineers, so people who deal with the data plumbing, getting it in, storing it, and serving it up in efficient ways.
Sure.
I know that we have, I'm pretty sure our audience is sort of 40% PhD, 40% master's degree, and then the remainder are probably have some level of higher education. I think comparing that to general Python conferences, you will have a wider mix of academic backgrounds and a far wider mix of industrial backgrounds. I know at one of the PyCons I went to in the US several years ago, I was incredibly impressed just to see lots of parents walking around with their children. And they brought their children because there were Raspberry Pi hackathons, and so you could turn up with your child, and then the child would start to learn programming in Python on a Raspberry Pi, and then they'd take it at home afterwards. And so, not scientific at all, but educating the next most available generation. And I thought that was just blimey, that was very different to a typical scientifically led conference.
And do you think that by virtue of having a bit of more shared background and industry causes any difference in the social dynamics? Like, do you notice people at PyData conferences being, do you see them having an easier time sort of picking up conversations with their peers versus somebody at a PyCon because of the difference in background? Or
I think so. Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. I think because we're sort of in many ways a more specialized Python conference towards data analysis and data problems. Generally, it's a good assumption that most of the people you're talking to have a familiarity with all the mix of things: statistics, machine learning. I mean, you can roughly assume that anyone you talk to at a PyData knows a bit about machine learning, which is nice. So yeah, no, that has certainly been one. It's very easy and fluid to get talking to people, and we encourage a very conversational, discourse-driven style. We even have heckling in the meetings, right? I mean,
it's all about the heckling.
Oh, I don't know whether this is just a UK thing, but there's something about having it so that it's really interactive. It's not just turn up, sit down, watch the show. It's thank you for coming along, have a pizza and a beer, but get in the conversation, right? It's all about giving back, and that's that I guess is that's I would say is kind of the focus of what we've got there.
certainly one of the more difficult things at a general Python conference will be that you turn around, you say, hello, my name's Ian, who are you? And you start a conversation with somebody, and then you discover that you have a very, very different background. So possibly, say in a PyCon US with 2,500 people, quite possible you've got no shared background at all, no shared work interests. You're both at the conference for your own reasons, and it's quite hard to get some kind of overlap. And that's lovely, and it's interesting, but it's hard to find people who really care passionately about your core subject. And we have a similar problem with our PyData meetups in that we have 200 people turning up every month. So our regular meetups are the size of a small conference every month for free. So that's a heck of an achievement. But we do have people turning up with a high performance background or a natural language processing background or a time series econometric background, or they're data engineers and they don't really care about what you do with the data, they just want to store it. So one thing we've started to experiment with is sections of the room during the breaks being designated that corner, that's for visualization, and that corner, that's for machine learning, and then the bar, that's for general conversation. And that way the 200 people have a better chance of finding people who want to talk about their particular subject right now. And I think that seems to be working really quite nicely. So I think it's interesting that the same problem happens at a different scale, even at a conference like PyCon.
So does PyData do anything in particular to encourage users from disciplines that might not be aware how much our community has to offer to choose the Python suite of data analysis tools?
I guess we sort of do, yeah. So we've there are plenty of people who come along to PyData who are part of the R user groups. I think we did a plug for one of their conferences, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely.
The Earl conference. So,
yeah, we've plugged the last couple of them. And they've plugged us as well.
And they've plugged us as well. We chat to the big O people who are, they use a fair chunk of Python. But then again, they tend to also be sort of, more high performance focused. Weirdly, we sometimes get comments in the meetup. There was a few meetups ago, someone had put, there wasn't any Python discussed in this particular talk. And yeah, while we are sort of focused on Python because it's a popular language in this space and it's a good language to sort of put up on a slide and read and understand, it's very interesting because once you get to a certain level with like if you need extra performance, then yeah, you need to drop down into C or maybe Pythonize your code or something, right? Or for others, there's compatibility things like you have to get it running on the JVM because that's the setup they've got. So there is a fair bit of overlap that occurs naturally anyway with the people who come along. So I'd like to think that we pivot around both the Python bit and the data bit of our group. So we don't do anything in particular. Sorry.
One of the points we've made for the conference is that Python is definitely the hook, and so we want the majority of speakers to be talking about the use of Python, but it's not just about Python. We need people who are using R or Julia or SPSS or MATLAB or Java, I guess, for the big data side. People coming into the community with other ideas, other impressions, other backgrounds, other use cases, so that we can have a nice cross-discipline sharing of experience at the conference. Otherwise, you end up in danger of being in a little echo chamber in your own little closed ecosystem, everyone patting each other on the back and saying, oh yes, we've got the best techniques, and kind of ignore everybody else. Yeah. And that's not how the rest of the world works. So we do our best to be very inclusive there. And yeah, sure, we have had people complain that 3 months in a row we've had other languages being discussed alongside Python. How about just an all Python night? And yeah, sure, we normally just have Python nights for our monthly meetups. But I'm very keen to get other people in from other backgrounds, spread the word and see who comes in with a contrarian opinion. Hopefully upsets some of the natural order of things and changes some of the normal thinking, because that's how new ideas get tested, and that's what science is all about.
Really?
I think that's fantastic, and I've certainly, if you've been listening or even if you haven't on this podcast, I've been a huge proponent of people need to break out of their sandbox and look at what other communities are doing, because
absolutely.
I feel very strongly that, I came from Ruby and learned Python and said, oh my God, you guys have built some amazing toys over here. So, and vice versa. So I think it's great to be a Python fan, but be aware of what else is happening outside the boundaries of the Python community. That's the only way we're going to continue to learn and evolve.
Yeah, Oh, definitely. I mean, I don't know whether it's whether we're just fortunate with the people we have, or maybe it's the focus on focusing on data, or that a lot of our members are sort of ex-scientist, but everyone is very critical of everything they use, all the tools they use, and things of that nature. So I think the reason why Ian and I sort of try and encourage that in our group is simply because that's sort of the background we come from. But you're quite right. There's no winners in a flame war, so it makes a lot of sense to be able to discuss which thing is better, what makes it objectively better. Because I don't know whether you can make it entirely as a pure Python guy. I think there is something to be said for if you're a little bit polyglot, like have one language you're really strong in and then know a smattering of the others, you can be a lot more dangerous than just knowing one language.
Yeah, and it's very rare that you come across a code base that has only one language in it, or not necessarily a single code base, but a particular application environment. Even if you're just doing web development, you're guaranteed to be running up against JavaScript, or if you're doing big data analytics, you're bound to come across Java at some point, or if you're doing a lot of distributed computing, chances are you're going to come across something either Java or Erlang. So being able to at least understand how to parse those languages to be able to figure out what's going on when you come across an edge case is definitely important. So even if you don't necessarily write anything in other languages, having some familiarity in what other languages are capable of and why they're used in those cases and how they operate under the covers a little bit is definitely valuable and makes you much more valuable as an engineer.
Sure. I mean, to Chris's point about the crossover with something like Ruby, I think there's a fair chunk of that involved with things like Chef, right? And while you'll have Python developers who themselves aren't probably using Ruby as their main scripting language for data analysis, they're probably using something like Chef or Puppet to orchestrate all the servers, because that becomes a concern when you're plumbing things together.
Absolutely, that's my day job, actually, writing Python and Chef.
Ah, very good. I'm more of an Ansible man myself, but I have had on occasion to play with Chef and Puppet.
I definitely need to look at Ansible. Sorry, Tobias.
I was going to say I'm salt stack whenever I can be.
Ooh.
So you've both spent a good portion of your careers using Python for working with and analyzing data from various domains, and I'm wondering how that experience has evolved over the past several years as newer tools have become available.
Oh, well, so I've been using Python for, I think, 14 years, something like that now.
So what would you have started on, Ian? What version is your...
I don't know. What was Python 14 years ago? I have no idea. I know
it probably didn't even have a
NumPy
major number, mate. It was probably like 0.
No. It was well established. There was at least one book in the local Waterstones bookstore. I remember because I just thought, well, it must be legitimate because there's at least one book out for it. Now I know that was sometime around the unification of the math libraries into NumPy by Travis Oliphant. So that was the beginning of the scientific community coming together with a shared base layer of numeric tools, and it was that was way back before pandas and scikit-learn and the like. I guess one thing I've seen evolve is the stack massively improving. So we had NumPy with homogeneous arrays of data, and then pandas allowing heterogeneous arrays to be put together in an Excel-like spreadsheet, and scikit-learn making it super easy to do your machine learning, and matplotlib growing up quite nicely into a very powerful, a little bit fiddly at times, but a very powerful plotting library. I think one of the most interesting things has been the disconnect with some of the clients. So I run my own consultancy, and I've been consulting for over 10 years. So I've spoken with a lot of clients, and when they see data science and Python on the rise, they kind of match that with a lot of the publicity, partly from the big data world and partly from companies like IBM, and they begin to assume that because it's AI in data science, Probably because, say, Google can do speech recognition and because IBM can beat humans in Jeopardy, probably there are these open source libraries that are just kind of human conversational level, freely available, and they can predict human buying habits, and you could knock out a prototype in the space of a week to improve spending patterns and advertising. And I find it's kind of interesting. It's a bit of a tricky conversation to calm clients down there, but it's lovely that clients have bought into the fact that Python and the data science community is so well established that this kind of thing must be possible by now, surely. So that's an interesting evolution, I think, from tools used by scientists through to clients, assuming that some of these things are just kind of solved problems now when they're not yet.
I would say I have forgotten the question initially posited here.
Oh dear, was I monologuing?
Oh dear.
So I'm just wondering how in the length of your career of using Python for data analysis, I'm wondering how your experience has evolved over the past several years as newer tools have become available.
So one of the big experiences that I've had is that my continued use of R decreases over time. I think about the time when pandas came in and gave us a really decent data frame object. That was a big use case for things that I was doing. When you're organizing clinical trial data sets, things of that nature, if you're doing a sort of a small trial that you've got a couple gigabyte file, that kind of thing, it can all fit in memory. If you can do it with something like pandas, it's very, very quick and very expressive to get stuff done. Matplotlib has become easier and easier to use, and let's see, Seaborn came out a few years ago, and that just by importing Seaborn, all of your graphs got prettier, which was a really nice effect I found. So it's generally I find myself relying less and less on that. I, for all of my sins, have done lots and lots of MATLAB because of signal processing of biomedical signals and things of that nature, and I've become less and less attached to it. But I still, I'm still stuck on there. So I see a fair chunk of room where I can move on in future. But broadly what's happened is I've been homogenizing onto the Python platform because it's been expanding to fill my needs, which has been, it's been lovely to see. And I've only been using it for 6 years or so. So a much shorter time. But in that time, it's become very strong indeed for what I need it for.
I guess that point about homogenizing onto the Python stack is one of the key ones here. So rather than having languages that are specialized at certain points of the scientific problem spectrum, with Python we get a language and a tool set that means we can go from taking data kind of from anywhere and then doing the necessary munging on that data to turn it into something useful, modeling it, visualizing it, exporting it, and putting it into production under monitoring, deployed wherever you need it, and you can do it all in one language. And that means then although we may not have the best language and the best libraries for any one particular part of that process, you've only got one language to keep in mind. So you've got a bunch of developers who are just dealing with one conceptual model, one language, one syntax, and that really eases development and deployment and debugging and support and all of those things. And I think really that's the main strength that I see of Python evolving in the data science world. You can kind of do all of it just in the one ecosystem.
And so for somebody who's just getting started in the data analytics space, what advice can you each give about, how to, what are the best things to learn first, how to establish themselves, or just any general advice as far as, doing data analytics itself?
Oh, sure.
Well, I'm going to dive in there
because
I've given a couple of keynotes talking about this kind of thing. So it was my honor to give a couple of keynotes at PyCon Ireland, PyCon Sweden, and the Budapest Business Intelligence Conference over the last year and a half. And one of the things I talked about was helping people, particularly engineers, move on with developing data science products and getting successful products shipped. And so one of the things that I think people get a bit hung up about and forget is that you can go an awful long way with some really simple data science work. And by really simple, I mean drawing graphs and doing a bit of filtering on your data. There's so much you can do. That's partly why Tableau is so powerful. You can do an awful lot just by drawing your data and cleaning it up. So you want clean data that you can visualize and explain. and then maybe you can do a bit of statistical modeling or some machine learning on it using tools like pandas and scikit-learn. Then you do some more visualization, and then when you've got something that's really robust, then maybe you want to get it deployed and shipped out there. And if you want to practice, then something like Kaggle, the machine learning competition site, that's an ideal place because there are lots of competitions from simple to quite complex with an open forum full of solutions and discussions about how people have improved things. So there's quite a wealth of material out there which helps people get started. But one of the biggest things I've seen people get hung up on is the need to do something really, really clever and cutting edge, like a deep learning Spark distributed solution, when actually you can get away with putting it in a small data frame in RAM and running a logistic regression classifier on it and visualizing it in 2 dimensions. And maybe it turns out that's just as good. And if that's a robust solution, then great, just do that.
Yeah, I've definitely, particularly in the big data space, seen a lot of mention of people saying how, people are far too likely to get carried away in the approach to a given problem, where they see a data problem, they say, "Oh, I'm going to throw Hadoop at it," when all you really need is pandas and your laptop. So.
Well, and it's worth definitely remembering that, my laptop has 4 cores and 16 gigabytes, but I can go to Amazon and for a couple of bucks an hour, I can rent a machine with 50 or 60 cores and hundreds of gigabytes of RAM, and as long as my problem fits into that, and it turns out you fit an awful lot of data into a couple of 100 gigabytes, then I have no deployment problems. I don't need to hire someone to run a Spark deployed environment for me. I can iterate really quickly, and because data's not being thrown around amongst the number of machines, I get a solution back really quickly. So I, as an individual or in a small team, can iterate really quickly on my ideas. And I'm a huge proponent of small to medium data, just keeping it on one machine and going as far as you can with that before having to worry about a big data solution and the complexity that involves.
Well, I think this is a sub-problem of the general problem that we all face as technologists, in that we see shiny toys and we want to play with them, right? I mean, it really is that simple, isn't it?
Yeah, I can definitely agree on that point.
Well, right, no one got fired for suggesting a big data solution from one of the big providers, but it doesn't mean that it's, pragmatically, as an engineer, it doesn't mean that it's the right solution.
So how can conferences like PyData help strengthen the bonds and synergies between Python software community and the sciences?
I think it gives them their niche to work in. Speaking to the fact that we've such a large proportion of the PyData members are either scientists or ex-scientists who are working in industry. It gives them an opportunity to focus on their particular problem domain, with Python just being, the tool that we all sort of group around. And I think out of any of the languages, Python has, I think, the strongest, especially for your casual programmer. Speaking as someone who comes from life sciences, where there are very few people who actually do a lot of programming. A lot of our problems aren't, heavily computational. They're more sort of wet work stuff, getting the actual sensor on properly and observing a very large sort of macro change. Then PyData helps a great deal in that respect. And before that, Perl did a great job. If you're looking at in the bioinformatics space, Perl's still very much a king in that area. But I'd argue for sort of anyone who's got a casual interest in doing some programming, there isn't much better language to advise than Python. So consequently, PyData is very much that bridge to help it go two ways. You have people who are career programmers who want to learn more about problem domains, and you've got people with problem domains who want to learn more about programming.
Certainly, we see at the conference a lot of industrial users of Python being, they kind of exist under the term data engineer at the moment. So regular engineers who know how to move data around, and then they're trying to do more interesting things with their data. But if they haven't got a data science background, so they haven't got a PhD or master's in those kind of numerous subjects, then maybe they're wondering, how do they go and do this? But at the conference, they can meet other industrialists who are doing this, and certainly they can meet academics who are working on these kind of problems. problems. So the conference gives a great ground for cross-pollinating different ideas and different solutions. But rather than just having problems that are presented as being interesting problems that could be solved, instead you've got a driver of, hey, we're failing, we've got this huge data set, we want to do something with it, and it's not working. Can someone help us? We've got some money, we've got a strong desire to do something. Can someone come and help us with this problem? And I think that's a really interesting driver to bring people together. And certainly via the PyData, we've been reaching out to other groups here in the UK. One of my particular pushes this year is into the Royal Statistical Society. So the RSS is a couple of 100 years old. We have a couple of members of the RSS in our PyData group, but not many. And I know that the Royal Statistical Society have been trying in the last year to get more involved in the big data community, regardless of language, just large data sets in general, to see if they can find interesting ways to apply some of their knowledge into these newer industrial areas that are growing up. And so I'm reaching out into the RSS and trying to get members to come along and speak and attend the conference as another way of just bringing in people with another diverse, different set of backgrounds, different set of opinions to come and join the conversation and see if we can get some idea sharing going on.
And so there are a number of different subtopics within the blanket categorization of data science. Is it difficult to balance the subject matter in PyData conferences and meetups to keep members of the audience from being alienated?
Yeah, no, that is a really tricky area. So we did a survey. I say we. Ian sent out the survey to all of our members to get a handle on the kind of things that they want to see more of or what they're involved in.
And why? Because we're data geeks. We want surveys. We want all the answers.
Right. So we know something like a third of the people there. It's London, right? There's a lot of people involved in the financial services. So people who are in quant finance or doing the data plumbing behind it, all of that kind of jazz. But almost a third of the responses were sort of other. So there's a really long tail to all these different domains that they're in. So yeah, it's kind of tricky. I mean, I guess what we keep doing is we keep relying on the fact that the meetup board gives us commentary back as to how they think we're doing. They rate the meeting to see how they felt it went, and we do our best to reply to that and adjust it accordingly. And I guess because we are fairly data driven, we can also sort of categorize and the rest of it the talks that we've done. And that gives us a fairly good idea as to whether we're sort of hitting all the various areas. But I guess even if someone isn't in a particular problem area, they can still take something home from it. Like
Emlyn, you're making this sound terribly principled. I don't think we're being that principled about it. We just keep changing the tune every month. We just keep trying to get different people in different topics talking. And I think it's that diversity in the talks that matters.
Right. But what we don't do, like for instance, I do a fair chunk of stuff in the biomedical area. And I don't deliberately try and get lots of biomedical speakers up on stage. And similarly, you do a lot of machine learning, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, we don't see it dominated by any of the one particular forces. So, right,
but part of the reason for that is there are other groups in London. I mean, there's 12 data-related machine learning type groups right now. There's one specialised in deep learning. There's another specialised in visualization. I think there's 2 or 3 in visualization. There's another one on text analytics. And so we've got groups that really go deep into each of those areas. And I think part of the role of PyData is to say that with Python and some other languages, you can do an awful lot of work with data. And here's a wide variety of examples of how data is being used. And hey, all the speakers are intelligent, the audience is intelligent, everyone's going to pick up something new every month, so come along and learn something new. And at worst, you have a beer with some friendly, interesting people and you go to the pub afterwards. So I think that's the main thing that happens.
So data science is still a young field, and we've yet to see lots of examples of the successful use of data. How are London-based companies using data with Python?
So I've definitely got ideas there. But Emlyn, do you have anything you want to throw in?
So particular companies that have been using it? I mean, I guess we have the speakers who've been up sort of recently give us a good idea of how they've been using it. So, List, there's often, 6 or 8 of those engineers coming along to the meetups every single time. One of our committee members works at List. They use it for doing all sorts of really fancy image processing and analysis to try and match up, if this blouse is on this website, is it the same blouse as the one on that website, and those sorts of things. So that's fascinating. The chaps at Deliveroo, it's basically like a UK version of the number of sort of fast food, restaurant food delivery services. they use it to plan their fleet so that they can, get optimized delivery for, products which spoil in a very short period of time. Yeah, there are so many who are in London and doing this that, could reel off more and more and more. But
so Ian, I think it's worth maybe mentioning our current hosts for the meetup, AHL, the hedge fund. They're an interesting story in that several years ago they had a heterogeneous environment. They had people using R and Python and MATLAB and a whole mix of research tools. And they centralized on Python, and they hosted the London Financial Python user group years ago after they'd switched into this pure Python mode. And the reason they've cited for switching to this Python mode is simply by having the researchers and the engineering team working with the same language, they can quickly ship and iterate and improve upon their trading approaches. So by losing a little bit of flexibility in all of the possible ways they could be developing new code, they get rid of a lot of friction around re-implementation of ideas that will then go out to engineering, and so they can quickly get things deployed, test, keep it if it works, if it breaks then take it out again and improve upon it. So I really like the fact that they're a traditional quant hedge fund, but they've centralized on just Python as their main tool. And the other example I'll cite is Channel 4. So this is I cite these as a bit of an unusual example. So we wouldn't normally think of a British broadcaster, television broadcaster, being data-driven. And so Channel 4, it's a public services broadcaster, so it's got a remit from the government to provide certain requirements. It's not a purely commercially driven outfit, but it is commercially driven, so it's ad-driven. And so I'm working with these guys at the moment, and there's some interesting projects going on there. One is using classifiers to better understand the audience to improve ad targeting. So it's a bit like the Google model of having a good understanding of your audience to target the right kind of ads, but as a result they're able to increase their ad sale premiums by 30 to 50% because they're targeting people and they're able to tell their advertisers more about the audience that they're going to be advertising against. They're using unsupervised classification methods to better understand the diversity of the audience and the viewing habits and when they watch, where they watch, what kind of devices they're using. And also personalization, so recommending the right kind of shows. So rather than just having the video on demand being this kind of catch-up service that you go to if you miss a program, instead maybe it can turn into more of a destination, so a bit more like a Netflix-driven site. So in London, as Emlyn says, we have a lot of finance companies, and I love the fact that media companies and the fashion companies that Emily mentioned are getting more into the use of data to drive all of their decisions. And one thing we encourage with the PyData meetups and the conferences is to have companies stand up and say, hey, we're in this niche over here. You haven't heard of us. You probably didn't think we've got a data problem, but we have got a data problem, and here's how we're solving it. And these are our problems. This is where we'd like some feedback too. And I think that really helps to knit the ecosystem together in London, and it makes it much friendlier for companies to realize that they can use their data productively, take lessons from other domains, and encourage their management that they can see that in other domains people are solving these hard problems. So why don't we solve those problems too and use our data more productively?
So is there a particular Python data science library that you think needs a little extra love and attention, or one that you think, or one that doesn't exist that you think should?
Ooh. Now let's see. I mean, this always comes down to a personal bugbear, but I always think SciPy Signal could be. It could learn a lot basically from the MATLAB like function APIs. Just because it does a lot of the complicated signal processing tasks, and it's pretty good at that. But it doesn't make sort of easier, sort of more convenience functions available. So. Oh man, I should just go and do it, right? I mean, I always say this to people, and I never actually step up and do it. So looks like I shall get my pull request on and get involved. But that would be definitely one for me. Ian, can you think of any that you just...
Right, so something I've asked about in talks and the keynotes in the last couple of years is I want to see more tools that help us clean data, particularly text data, because text data is often broken, hard to mark up, it comes badly encoded, and then most people who deal with it don't have strong training in natural language processing, and they just want a tool where they can chuck in some unstructured text and it comes out in some kind of marked up, useful, clean, JSONified dictionary-like way, and those tools don't exist. So I would love to see some tools that make it easier to work with unstructured text. It's a rapidly evolving area, and Word2Vec in GenSim, that's helping a lot. But certainly there's room there. And in general, I think one thing that all the projects could do with, and I'll use as example stats models and PyMC3, is better documentation. So these projects have documentation, but documentation is always something in the open source world in general that people forget about. We consume the documentation. It's quite hard to write good documentation, and people don't really go and put the time into that. And so I said, if there's anything that anyone out there listening wants to improve, go and put in a pull request, or at least go and file a bug report and say, hey, this documentation's a bit wrong, or it's just lacking. There's one line and it doesn't explain anything. That's unhelpful. But maybe if you said this instead, this would be helpful, and maybe someone could turn this into an improvement against the documentation. All the projects are crying out for documenters, and if you've never contributed to an open source project ever, then one of the easiest things you can do is go and improve the documentation. You get loads of feedback on it, and everyone will love you for it, because normally people like writing the code, not the documentation. So please, go and help improve the documentation.
So before we move on, is there anything that we didn't cover that you think we should have, or anything that you want to bring up?
I think that covers a great deal of it. I'm trying to think. I mean, it's... I think that covers a great deal about what PyData does, and sort of the data science state of play in London, and I guess as a microcosm for the other centres in the world. I'm
pretty happy with that.
All right. So for anybody who wants to get in touch with either of you or follow what you're up to, what would be the best way for them to do that? Ian, how about you go first?
So for me, I blog, and I've got a Twitter account, and both are my name. So that's IANOZSVALD, and so that's my Twitter account, and ianosvald.com is my blog. And if you just Google for my name, you'll find my past talks and the like. I'm reasonably well represented in Google now.
And what about you, Emlyn?
I think the easiest way to get hold of me is probably on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Emlyn Clay. One of those lucky ones that has a rare enough name that no one had my handle.
No one has the Ozvalds.
Well, that too. And I own emlynclay.co.uk, but there's nothing on it, so no use going there.
All right, so we will move on to the picks. For my picks today, my first one is a tool called Xcape, and what it does is it's a Linux utility that lets you remap your keys to have different functionality. So you just write out a config file for it, and it will remap your whatever key you want to whatever other key you want. I personally use it for being able to let my caps lock key be an escape key. So I use Emacs, and so I was
gonna ask. That smelled like an Emacs thing to do, because I've done that back in the day. And you train your fingers to do it, and then as soon as you use somebody else's computer, everything gets hard.
Yes.
So
yeah. So I use KDE for my desktop, and so I've remapped the caps lock key to be control when it's used as a modifier. But with Xcape, I can also use it as an escape key when I'm not using it as a modifier. So it does double duty. And so my other pick for today is going to be the Keybase file system. So they recently put out a brief blog post and announcement about a new tool that they added in. So with the newest version of the Keybase utility, it will actually map a network drive onto your computer that is encrypted using your GPG keys. And so what that does is it lets you put files into directories based on the IDs of other users of Keybase. And even if they're not a user of Keybase yet, you can, for instance, put it at a file path that includes their Twitter username, so that when they do sign up for Keybase and associate their Twitter ID with their account, they will then automatically gain access to those files that you put on the Keybase file system. So it's a very, very interesting and new application for encryption and shared file storage, and I think it's pretty innovative. So I definitely recommend people check that out and take a look. Keybase is still invite only, but that being said, I've got something like 100 invites remaining. So for anybody who wants to get an account and check it out, just get in touch with us either via Twitter or sign up for our discourse forum and leave a post there. Just send us a message about what you like most about the show, and I will follow up and get you an invite. So Chris, what about you?
Let's see. So my first pick, first of all, I just want to say Keybase.io is awesome. Those folks are doing such a great job making crypto tools accessible to the everyman. I think it's fantastic, and I can't wait till they go public so I can trumpet them from the highest mountaintop. My first pick is a book by Ian M. Banks called The Player of Games. It's the second in his Culture series of novels. And all I have to say about it is I love these stories. They're amazing. And this is one of the only science fiction futures that I want to live in. Like, if I could push a button and beam myself into that future being a member of the culture, I would sign up for it in a heartbeat. I want to live there and do that. It's just a really interesting world having to do with the evolution of humankind and the evolution of machines in a very sort of non-dark, doom they're taking over kind of way. It's great stuff.
The entire culture universe is fabulous. I just recently reread Accession, so yeah, I'll double up your recommendation there. Anything by Banks and the culture universe is amazing. It's a really good utopia.
I need to read some of his other stuff that's not culture, but I'm enjoying the culture books so much that I'm just starting there.
Yeah, just hoover them up.
My next pick is a game called Undertale. This game is not what it appears to be. It deserves a second look. It looks like your standard kind of RPG-ish kind of thing with an odd combat mechanic, but it really is not. It is an exploration in morality, and it is totally worth a look. Is that a knowing laugh that I hear there?
No. An exploration of morality through computer game. I love the idea of that.
Yeah. It's definitely worth checking out. You guys should definitely give it a look. And my third and final pick is a movie called The Big Short. I was really impressed with this film. It's beautifully crafted. The acting is great. The writing is phenomenal. It does a really excellent job of explaining some fairly complex concepts in a way that is both incredibly accessible, incredibly funny, and it just sort of shocks your brain into being receptive. It's a really good movie. I highly, highly recommend.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I watched that a little while ago. My wife and I devoured all of the things that were coming up for nomination. No, I thought The Big Short was one of the better ones. I very much enjoy a good technical film. I mean, I don't work in the financial sector, and I know a little bit about the stock market and how it works, but this felt really quite meaty as to what it was doing. And then, of course, the thing that gets you towards the end is that nothing's been learned. It's just amazing how, all these things have occurred. And, they did an exceptional job at explaining, how the system got itself into such a bender. So, I'd similarly echo. That's a great film to go see.
So, Ian, what picks do you have for us?
Right, I'm going to go for 4, and I'll try and keep them brief. So, Emlyn mentioned Seaborn, the visualization library. If you're using Python for visualization and you're using pandas to represent your data, then you have to look at Seaborn, Seaborn. It can consume a panda's data frame, and it will do things like spit out box plots and strip plots of your columns of data with neat labeling and sensible color schemes and heat maps and violin plots and kernel density estimates and all sorts of things. Really, really easy, like in 1 or 2 lines. Definitely go for Seaborn for visualization. I'm working on a project to try to understand allergic reactions through machine learning, and it's something I'm covering on my blog. So this is it's a pick because I'm interested in this, and I'll be talking about this at conferences. If anyone out there has a background around understanding allergic rhinitis and allergies in general, and is interested in the idea of machine learning to help citizen science your way through to solving this, then I would love your feedback, and you'll find that mentioned on my blog. I've got a book which is a slightly contentious pick. This is Rui Miguel Forte's Mastering Predictive Analytics in R. So it's deliberately an R book, not a Python book. I'm looking at it as kind of a secret hidden manual to Python stats models. So R and stats models, so stats models actually is a subset of all of the things available in R. In this book, Miguel is covering a statistician's view upon machine learning using R, and you can just take it sideways and go straight across into stats models, which I don't believe has a book available at the moment, and you can use the same techniques in scikit-learn. So if you want a statistician's view upon doing predictive analytics, I really recommend mastering predictive analytics in R. And finally, if you're visiting London, I recommend you take a walking tour of London with Unreal City Audio. This is a small niche group of actors who will take you on an interactive tour of London with props. Props will include people leaping out from behind buildings to give you a discourse, and they will include things like on the coffee house tour, you will have original 17th century bitter coffee to drink. There's a chocolate house tour where you get original 17th century hot chocolate, and at the moment we've just missed it, and we're going to be going for one of the ones coming up, a medieval wine tour, where one of the goals is to get you a little bit tipsy whilst teaching you history of the centre of London. So, Unreal City Audio is a massive, massive shout out to those guys. If you come to London and you want a really good tour, go to Unreal City Audio. I love them.
All right, and what about you, Emlyn?
Right. Well, I've only got the one pick. This was based on some stuff I was playing with today. So I love making slideshows in the IPython notebook. Even if they're not really necessarily much about code, I just like making it inside of that notebook. And I was playing around today with the template flag so I could customize what was going on. And because it uses the lovely Ginger templating syntax, you can do phenomenal things. Like if you've ever wanted to get really involved in making sort of slightly different animations, really exciting slides where, you know, the graph animates slightly, or, you know, being able to blend bits of like D3 into a presentation. I'm up for doing a pitch to some private equity people, and I was doing it so that the whole application that we've recently done is inside the IPython notebook that you can play with, and so I found the template flag to be just fantastic for dealing with bits around that. So yeah, I mean, definitely have a look. If you haven't ever made a slideshow in anything other than PowerPoint, put down the PowerPoint right now and get IPython and use the nbconvert command line tool to turn it into a reveal.js slideshow, and profit. Everyone will think you're the coolest guy in the world. Fact.
Emlyn, do you have a blog post or something on the process that you used for that?
Oh, I am terrible. I'm so bad at writing this stuff down. So I really should. I really should have a blog. I do not. So I will do. But if you do need somebody to look at, I was looking at Damien Alvarda's blog, and he's one of the core contributors to IPython. Before I was doing a conference talk at PyData London a few years ago, I tweeted out, "Oh no, this thing is broken." And Damien Alvarda got on the case and fixed it for me just before the conference. So he's an absolute hero. He's got a whole bunch of good stuff there. So yeah, I'll put it in your show notes for all the lovely, all the lovely listeners.
All right. Well, we definitely appreciate the both of you joining us and taking time out of your day to tell us more about your PyData organization in London and both of your experience in using Python for your own work. So I definitely learned a lot, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, pleasure.
Hey, Tobias, Chris, thank you very much for having us. This has been a lot of fun.
It has been. Thank you.